name's Jono. I'm a technical analyst from the PwC Threat Intelligence team. I'm very, very grateful to the Sleuthcon committee for having me here and for me being able to represent my team's research. I cannot move slides, but I do know them, so it's all good. I always take the opportunity with the introduction to kind of thank my team. They're so excellent. The PwC Threat Intel team is kind of like, I like to think of like the world's best kept secret. Everyone in the team is amazing. And my colleagues do an excellent job of tracking APTs and crimeware, and you'll see a lot of that in the presentation. So I know some of you are watching online. Thanks for existing. You guys are excellent. And if you don't know anyone in the PwC Threat Intel team, I'm more than happy to be the gateway drug. What we're going to talk about in this talk, which you maybe will see at some point, is we're going to look at 3 case studies from the Asia-Pacific region in regards to ransomware. Ransomware in Asia, we're also going to talk about just a little bit in terms of how it functions and why it's a little bit different to that of the West. I will preface and say that I don't actually live in Asia, and I'm not native to Asia, but I have spoken to colleagues who are from there, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that works and what why ransomware is so different over there. Then we're going to use the case studies that I've got to effectively talk through the TTPs used, including a very spicy actor that we found that we assess highly likely to be a ransomware group that is based in Asia, and we can go through their entire tool suite thanks to an open directory that they left out for us, which is very nice. This is going to be a very awkward presentation without any visualization. So imagine that you can see a case study wherein a threat actor called Veles, which is a threat actor that we assess is highly likely based not in the Asia-Pacific region, but based in Eastern Europe. If anyone knows the malware X matter, might ring a bell. This is a threat actor that was found intruding on a threat actor in Asia. An organization in Asia. For initial access, this is where the talk gets really interesting, and it would be so much more interesting if you could see how interesting it was. You would see that the threat actor managed to get in on 3 separate occasions across a period of a month. The most interesting part is that the initial access was a download by an individual in the company of a cracked software called PTC Creo. Now, PTC Creo is a software that you can use to kind of head up visualizations or just increase visualization software. It is a visualization software. The cracked software included within the README and the other files within the package, the .rar package, the same extension as the ransomware that came a month later. Super spicy because it kind of indicates, and you'd have to come up with a confidence assessment, that either the threat actor placed it there for someone to find, which is not like the threat actor to do before. We've done a number of intrusions on this threat actor. We've seen nothing like that in the past. Or that they employed an insider to potentially find the malicious software, because if you would have been able to see, you would have been able to see that they visited a number of websites prior to the actual finding the actual software that they wanted. The problem is that there is no connection between individual 1, we'll call them individual 1, and individual 2 and individual 3. Now, those 2 accounts, the latter 2, are individuals who were found, the accounts that were found to be used in the actual intrusion a month later. The theory, or a theory, is that individual 1 was a shared account. We saw that individual 1 was able to effectively the threat actor was able to download through individual 1 a bunch of key logging software. So we assessed it with a realistic probability that actually they were able to see all of the credentials going in and out. Okay, Asia, it's bad. There's lots of ransomware, but not as much as there is in the West. And the NCA and the FBI have either covered that or will cover that in about 5 minutes or after lunch. Ransomware was bad, but it is not as bad as it was, again, thanks to the NCA and the FBI. We've been through that. There are other actors in the region. We're going to come on to White Dev 173 in a little second. They are the threat actors that I aforementioned that have the open directory involved. The case studies, again, Veles is the one we've basically talked through without the slides, but we'll do a little bit of the slides. The second case study is one that's based in a threat actor that we assess is based in the Asia Pacific region, which is kind of like a halfway house between White Veles and White Dev 173. It's interesting because they use the lockbit builder, but not lockbit, but they do claim to be lockbit halfway through their intrusion, and then don't have a leak site or any exfiltration whatsoever, which is really interesting and weird. Okay, Veles, there's the visualization I wanted you to see, and you're going to look at it for a lot shorter period than I wanted you to at the time. I spent a lot of time on it. It's all good. This is what I was talking about, the individual one timeline. If I go back, because I can do that, you can see the individual one and individual two. There's like a question mark there. And that's where we don't really know why it is that individual two logged in a month later than individual one. We're just not sure why that is. But we assess with a realistic probability that there was a keylogger installed, and you can see that on this slide from the timeline, that the threat actor essentially installed a bunch of keylogging software, a bunch of like user like data upload software, and then a month later they return with a completely different account. So we assess with a realistic probability that the threat actor basically used this weird PTC Creo software to effectively enter into the environment, which, as I said, is super novel. It's just not something that you see every day from a threat actor, particularly one as prolific as White Veles and one that so much of the industry has such a great handle on. It's just super rare to see, and it really is only something we've seen them do whilst acting in the Asia Pacific. This is the part I was mentioning. You can kind of see it. I always misjudge how easy it is to see things on slides, but you can see like the similarity between a legit cracked PTC Creo. Let me say that again. A legit cracked version of PTC Creo and the White Veles PTC cracked PTC Creo. There are similarities. They basically just repackaged, it looks like, a malicious version of PTC Creo, which is weird, and then made it more malicious. And the file extension you can see underlined is the same file extension of the ransomware that we saw a month later, which if that weren't the case, it'd be really spooky, but if you know, it wouldn't be anything to look at. But if you know how ransomware configs are built, they're done at runtime often, or they decide that the extension is loaded in before the ransomware is compiled. So it looks like an executive decision. More questions than answers, but it's just one of those case studies I wanted to highlight where we can clearly see a threat actor that is quite prolific in Europe and the West, or targeting Europe and the West, has a completely different tool set when it comes to Asia. I wanted to do this. Threat intel is one of those industries where like we really love not just the sound of our own voices, but we love our work so much, and sometimes we don't do a good enough job of making it relevant for other people. And I wanted to basically take the case studies and create a defender's retrospective, seeing what could have been done differently. Not only because it's a cool thing to do, but because you will see over the course of the case studies that there will be overlap in defenses. So whilst the TTPs are unique, there are oftentimes like really quick wins for defenses. And in this case, is like no real difference. Network segmentation, for example, to prevent users from being able to access more of the network than they otherwise could have done. Having allow and deny lists for different websites should kind of be a thing that we all employ in this case, because it allowed for a threat actor to get in, but otherwise it's just a really basic thing to employ. And it's quite common here in the West, less common in Asia to do so. MFA on remote access or remote services, or even just RDP sessions in general, having MFA installed as much as possible on all accounts, but certainly for remote sessions is something that is not as common as you see with user-based accounts, or rather like desktop accounts. And that's just a really quick win. And then also like exfil, I can say, because I saw it, the exfil took place over like a number of days. If you had maybe like a network, like some network infrastructure in place, or a network traffic monitor, you would be able to see a bunch of traffic going out on port 22 or 80, especially because it's so consistent. The case study 2.1, which is interesting in its own way because it involves a threat actor based in the Asia Pacific region. We assessed realistic probability just based off of the fact that the contact email they were using, the contact data they were using was based in CN. As you'll see with White Dev 173, I'm not here to make any political statements. I'm just here to give you the data, and everyone can do with that what you want. Black Turtle specifically went after Veeam servers first. That's an interesting thing to note, because oftentimes ransomware entities, at least from the observations that I've made whilst doing incident response cases, has been that the threat actor will find Veeam eventually. In this case, they gunned for the Veeam servers straight for backup. Now, I spoke to individuals who worked alongside on the case based in Asia, and they made an interesting point that I can't say is gospel, so I'll put realistic probability in front of it so no one can hold me to account on anything that I'm about to say. In Asia, there's a lot less of a focus on payment. They don't care so much. It's quite easy for them to rebuild with the advent of cloud, so they don't take it. It's not they don't take ransomware seriously. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a definite trend towards we'll just rebuild after the fact. Even if they encrypt, we'll just rebuild. And so it's interesting with that knowledge in mind, or at least that anecdote in mind, that the threat actor went immediately for Veeam, and then after that targeted other servers as well through proliferation. They encrypted Veeam, had an ESXi kind of leaning, and then went to Windows after that, which again, it depends on the cases you look at. It's less common. In terms of a defender's retrospective, although there's some pretty images that I managed to get. There's some IOCs there as well. If you want to take a picture or just want to memorize some IOCs, some IPs, it's good luck. The threat actor pretended to be Lockbit. They ostensibly emailed the client or the victim and said, "We are Lockbit. Here's our leak site. Please pay us now." They didn't exfiltrate any data, and immediately upon being questioned, gave them the email to use, which is blackturtle@sugo.cn, which was super interesting. The communications all took place in English, which was also a weird development. I think I would have expected, given the victim and given the nature of the threat actor, that it would have been in Chinese, but it wasn't. So the English communications was an interesting development. I've used the word interesting a lot. I'm going to continue to use it. In terms of a defender's retrospective, again, we can see some overlap there. Segmented network can prevent proliferation via one user having access. I forgot to mention that, but you can read it, that the threat actor got in via a FortiGate SSL VPN vulnerability, which what I didn't mention is that the victim was told to patch this from a previous incident about 4 years ago, and they didn't. So there were easy, quick win fixes to prevent threat actors from getting into the environment at all, let alone proliferating. I'm pretty sure that's all I want to say. Oh, also, things like MFA on accounts is a classic one. Making sure that passwords are being re-rolled is a super interesting one. And again, some of these are controversial within the industry. I'm about to mention the MITRE ATT&CK framework in a little second, which I know is going to cause some controversy. But some things are really quick wins and shouldn't be controversial, i.e. patch your systems and constantly do vulnerability scanning where possible. This one is not the juicy one. It's all juicy. It's all good intel. And again, I really cannot stress enough how grateful I am for my colleagues and friends across the world, across PwC, who have just provided all of this intel and helped create and cobble this together, because this presentation would not be what it is without them. So a huge shout out for the second time to my guys and gals over at PwC. White Dev 173 is kind of a bit of a pride and joy of ours. We do quite constant scanning within the Asia Pacific region for cool little snippets of stuff, and we found an open directory that had port 18443 open that contained not just a whole suite of tools, but most significantly the Lockbit builder, and immediately not alarm bells, but instantly immediately interesting, because even though we do see threat actors not based in the Asia Pacific host in Asia, it's not as common as you might think, or it's not as common as I thought it was. And so immediately got to work looking at what we had found within the directory. And what we found is a whole suite of tools. And I thought the best way to go about looking at it, both from an analysis perspective, but from a presentation perspective as well, is to look at it from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And I know that the MITRE ATT&CK framework for some people in this industry is, it is what it is. It's a framework. But for this particular example, it works really, really well because I cannot explain to you every tool that's being used, and many of you will probably recognize a lot of these tools, and some of them you might not. I thought it best to map them to the MITRE ATT&CK framework so we can get an idea of how this threat actor operates from recon all the way down to, impact and exfil and command and control. Did that smoothly transition? It actually didn't. There you go, to command and control. And we'll talk about some of these tools as we go. The recon initial access is always, for me, the most interesting because I'm going to spoil it for you, Cobalt Strike is used. The way it's used is quite novel, which is cool. But Cobalt Strike is Cobalt Strike. I can't talk about it for 30 minutes. But the recon initial access stuff is super interesting. It's where we understand how a threat actor thinks about and where they can develop entering into an environment. We see threat actors use credentials. We see threat actors sometimes use phishing, although less so now. And sometimes we see them using vulnerability scanning and then intrusion via some kind of exploit that they either find or develop themselves. In WhiteDev 173 cases, which I know is not the sexiest name, I know Threat Intel is quite famous for having weird and wonderful and wacky naming conventions. We are currently in the process of doing an ACH, or analysis of competing hypotheses. The reason it hasn't been done now is because I'm quite new to the States and was moving over, and it was a hassle. And we're quite stringent in the team about how we do our naming conventions, and this was no exception. So WhiteDev 173, as I said, not the sexiest name, but it will be changed to something a lot nicer once we get going. The initial access and recon is an interesting one because they use tools that sometimes we've seen across our more Western-based, or rather not Asia-based actors. Things like Web Scan Logic and Volmap, which are readily available on GitHub.
Xeon Viva, Xeon EXP, and Viva EXP. These are tools that specifically look to target web platforms that are written in Chinese language. I will say, and I'm not going to say what's here on the slide, but there is a bunch of TXT files that they use to kind of pump into these tools. The targeting is interesting, and again, I'm not making political statements. I'm here to show you what the data says. The IPs within their big TXT files that they would use are based in Korea, Taiwan, Iran, and mainland China. I don't know readily what that says about the actor. I don't know what their MO is, particularly they target very particular schemes and very particular countries. In this case, we see quite a broad breadth of targeting, but in the case of WhiteDev 173, it's focused on the Asia-Pacific region in general. I mentioned Cobalt Strike. The threat actor does use Cobalt Strike. We found a very specific instance of it. In fact, the threat actor was kind enough to leave on their open directory their logs. So I got to see them test out their Cobalt Strike instance 2 days prior to it going live. We actually found that Cobalt Strike instance before we found the group through our online net scanning, and we put two and two together that this was the group that was using the server. But we got to see them testing success. We got to see them set up their username and passwords. We had 4 usernames: JHC, Jay, Hannah, and Neo. All of them shared a similar password convention. It was JHC was Matthew at 123. J was J at 123 exclamation mark, and Anna's was Anna at 123 exclamation mark. We didn't get Neos, but we did see, we assessed with a realistic probability it probably followed the same convention. They are all entering the team server, which has a port number of 12345 and a team server password of 12345. Out of every single IP that was successfully definitely accepted the team server is based in Hong Kong. Of those 5, 3 of them are the same 27 range. Hopefully at some point I'll be able to get that. We did see, it wasn't in the slide, but we did see 1 unsuccessful
You don't have shotgun.
the team server via a IP router in Jiangsu province in China. They use very specific Cobalt Strike modules. Those who have never seen Cobalt Strike, they're really easy plugin tool. It's really easy to use. It has a really easy GUI to use. But you can also use plugin modules. Those are made via the native common web language aggressor, and if you ever see a .cna file, that is an aggressor script. Looks like that. It's one of those scripts. It's basically like a Java. Basically, it's really easy to make stuff, and you can see readily how the threat actors can use it to develop their own scripts. Now, why don't want something to develop its own script? It leverages plugins from Chinese GitHub, Ladon, quite famous within Chinese APT group, and some crime groups. I'll recommend another one, Veles. These are free China-based Chinese language written scripts. In fact, it's written entirely in Chinese. All the CMA files are written with the Mandarin Chinese language. Is no longer available on GitHub. It's taken down because it infringes on state cybersecurity new legislation. So we can only say with a risk probability to a highly likely confidence assessment, they have the full GitHub repo. We can only make that assessment now. If you basically the CNA files, the CNA files are quite similar. They all do a very similar thing. They effectively have everything from privilege escalation all the way down to like bypass, user creation, scheduled task creation, user deletion, everything that you could want for red team set. All of these tools are packaged together in other Chinese language commerce references like LSTAR or OneFox. You've heard of those. And that's basically how they conduct most of their operations. There are some other tools that they use. They do have their own scripts for some things, like bypassing and UAC bypass. They have their own custom script. Find anywhere else. Interesting, but they do need to be somewhat, again, bastardized versions of what we see in open source. So it's a product that is capable of developing tools if it has a helping hand to do so. The only other tools that we see on the instance are TTPs. They're not all sexy, they're quite old. Which is the dirty cow vulnerability, if anyone knows that. It's basically like it allows you to have like memory access to read over and then they use another one. Actually, no, they use the exploit. It's basically like a one-stop shop for all exploit scans, the influence, it out. It's a one-stop shop for all like Linux exploits, effectively. Again, not developing tools themselves, but they are in some way using privilege escalation tools outside the trouble site. So the suite is really extensive. Yep. In terms of, I don't know how long I have, to be honest, but I'll just close on here because the other stuff is in the rest of the back. It's going to be much more useful. Just recording on the slide. I'm not meaning, it's just easier to look at and have me talk to you. Again, defenses are something that will overlap with the other case studies that we looked at before. Stuff like MFA on account, both local and remote. Having user entity based analytics, where this is a bit more sophisticated, where you would effectively have like a nominal user, and you would say, okay, the nominal user will conduct X amount of activity. Any users outside of that, we would like to flag to a SOC, we would like to immediately alert to someone. Now that, for White Debt 173, would be really beneficial because a lot of their attack depends on them being able to create users and be able to use those new users to effectively escalate their privileges and then bypass a lot of TTPs. I did put in a slide that it would kind of be useful to have this admin role that isn't too extensive, but then I also said a lot of the tools that White Debt 173 have will bypass that because they're able to effectively shut down AV. So yes, extensive AV is always good, and it's always becoming better practice, especially if you're ensuring demand there, but also White Debt 173 might be able to save it. I'm going to close off by saying that in spite of technical difficulties, it's been a really wonderful experience. Big thanks to the Sleuthcon team. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.